Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us again today. And let's get back into our series entitled No Doubts. Let's go back over to the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11. Again, we've already made a lot of comments on this, so if you're just now joining us, you may want to go back and hear the things that we've said already about this. But I believe we can move ahead from what we've already said now and see how to eradicate doubts in our life. When you begin to see where doubts come from, then you can see how to get rid of doubts in our life. All right, Mark chapter 11, Jesus was going on his way to Jerusalem, to the temple. And of course there he ran out the money changers, cleaned out the temple, and restored that. But on his way over there, on the road, he was hungry. And he saw a fig tree afar off, had leaves on it. So he went up there to see if he could find some figs on that fig tree. Found none. It was a hypocrite fig tree, so to speak. It was fruitless. It did have leaves, an appearance of a fig tree, had some advertisement, but no fruit on it whatsoever. So Jesus, in response to that, he said, "No one eat fruit from you ever again, forever." Now, there was no fruit on there for anybody to eat anyway, so obviously this was symbolic. That fig tree is symbolic, and we looked at the fact first mentioned in the book of Genesis chapter 3 that the fig leaves were what Adam and Eve sewed together to hide their nakedness right after their sin in the fall, after they had eaten off the forbidden tree. Now, the whole reason that they had eaten off of the forbidden tree that God told them not to eat off of, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was because of their own self-righteousness. The enemy played on their personal pride and their sense of self-righteousness, that they can make their life more complete and better without God in it by doing something against what God had said. And I tell you, that's never going to work right there. First of all, God put them in a perfectly good environment. It was absolutely perfectly good. There was nothing wrong with where they were. There's nothing wrong with them. Actually, they were made complete. There was nothing incomplete in them. But see, they began to bite into the fruit of Satan's lies, deception, and distractions, and to believe that somehow by their own self-righteousness, by their own self-work, self-effort, they can make their life better without God in it. Not going to happen. And we know the history of this one, that after they partook off of that forbidden tree, that all of a sudden their eyes were open to their own self and to their own lacking and their own incompleteness, their own nakedness. And that's when they sewed those fig leaves together to try to cover up their nakedness. And they were the ones that ran away from God. God did not separate himself from man. They were running away from God in fear. God, in fact, came down in the cool of the day like he had always done, looking for them. They were hiding away from him, and they came out with those ridiculous clothes of fig leaves sewn together. And he said, "Who have you been talking to? Who told you that you were naked?" Well, guess what? Satan, the accuser of their brethren, not only tempted them, set them up for this failure to disobey God, but then, boy, he racked them up with condemnation, guilt, and shame, to the point that fear came into their life, and they tried to separate themselves away from God. And that is really what condemnation does in our life. And so the next day, we began reading this yesterday, in verse number 20, it says, well, on their way back from the temple there, verse 20, "Now in the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree that Jesus had spoken to, dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed is withered away.'" Now, why did Jesus curse that fig tree? Why did he say, "No one eat fruit from you ever again"? Again, there was no fruit on it anyway. What fruit was he talking about? He was talking about the fruit of man's own self-righteousness, his own self-works to try to save himself, provide for himself, make his life better, make his life fulfilled and complete without God. And that never worked. It never has worked. In fact, the works of man always open the door to the curse to come in, to the law of sin and death to come in and do all kinds of havoc. See, what we're experiencing in the world today is a mixture. It's not the way God originally intended it and created it. It is a mixture based on man's bad decision, based on his own self-righteousness and self-centeredness, It is a mixture of good and evil here. It's light and darkness mixed together. If you go back in the book of Genesis, you find out that God originally separated light from darkness. And that was before he created the sun, moon, and stars. That's not what he's talking about right there. He created light from darkness, good from evil. In fact, he put man, Adam and Eve, originally in a garden that was perfectly, absolutely nothing but good, something that God had created and put in motion. So what we see today, the curse, all the depravity, the famines, the sickness, the disease, the death, all those other things, the wars, rumors of wars, all those are a result of man's bad decision in the Garden of Eden. But you know what? Jesus came to put an end to that. He put an end to that. Peter noticed that fig tree dried up from the roots. See, Jesus had to deal with the root issue. That is an under the surface issue. Men most of the time are trying to deal with fruits, trying to deal with superficial things. They're trying to cut the weed off at the ground, but they never deal with the root of it. They can't, because only God can deal with the root issue, and Jesus did that. Just like he did with the fig tree, his work of salvation, his completed work on the cross, his shed blood is a completed work. It dealt with the root of sin. It dealt with the root of condemnation, guilt, shame, and the curse in our life. And I'll tell you what, that is what we're seeing played out right here. Now notice in verse 22, after Peter had drawn his attention, that Jesus, he didn't draw the attention to that, Peter did. He noticed it. He was probably looking for that fig tree and saw that fig tree had dried up from the roots that Jesus spoke to. And so Jesus took an opportunity to introduce us to New Covenant, New Testament living, which is a life of faith. And then he said in verse 22, Jesus answered Peter and said to them, have faith in God. Now, we kind of pass over that right there, but that is so significant what he said right there. He said, have faith in God. You know, they had heard about Abraham. They had heard about the patriarchs of old, how they had faith towards God. But you know, for the most part, the law really was put the focus on man. It put the focus on what we could do in our own works and the performance of men. It was basically do good, do bad, get beat, that kind of thing. And so we see that they were under the mentality of the law, where it was more faith in themselves rather than faith towards God. See, Jesus doesn't say anything insignificant. In fact, this right here, this one statement right here, is going to open the door to successful New Covenant, New Testament living. A life of joy, a life of peace, a life fulfilled in God, is that you have to have faith in God. Now notice that Jesus did not say, have faith in God and in you also, in yourself. No, he just simply said, have faith in God. Our faith has to be focused on God. Again, the way of salvation, the way of deliverance, the way of healing, the way of the blessing, the way of the good life is not in us. It's not in man. It's not in mankind. It's not in our works. It's not in our performance. It's not in our ability to do all these things for ourselves. It's in God's ability. And I can tell you, it's not God, please do. It's God, we recognize you've already done. And my faith is in God and in the finished, completed work of Jesus and in his shed blood. So we see right there that Jesus said that, made that very significant statement right there. He said, have faith in God. Have faith in God. Not in God and you, not in God and somebody else, not in God in a religious organization or institution, not in some kind of rules, regulations of men or traditions of men or anything like that. It's simply have faith in God, in the person of God. What we cannot do, God does. God did in Jesus. What we cannot do for ourselves, God completed it in Jesus and gave it to us free of charge by his abundant overflowing grace. But then verse 23, it says, Jesus goes on and says, most assuredly, I say to you. Now, why would Jesus say most assuredly? because he wants them to understand that what he's about to say, what he's about to unload on them, there's going to be reason for brain tilting and doubt right here of what he's going to say. He's going to introduce to them the way of the believer, the way of the Christian, the way of the new covenant believer. And he said, most assuredly, I say to you. So without a doubt, I'm not talking in code language, Jesus says. I'm not speaking in parables. He said, I'm talking straight right here. Most assuredly, I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things which he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Now, I tell you, a lot of people have thought, well, Jesus must be talking code language here. He's talking about something impossible. And he's talking about doing something impossible with something insignificant. Well, let me tell you something. It's not insignificant if we have faith in God. You know, in other translations, I think, bring this out. Then when Jesus said have faith in God, it also says have the God kind of faith. Have the faith of God. I think we can surmise that those two really go together. Having faith in God is having the faith of God. And you know what? He's not talking about using our faith, not something that we can muster up in ourselves. He's talking about having faith in God, or having the faith of God, the God kind of faith. And this is what the God kind of faith does. He said, if you can speak to a mountain. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we start going out and talking to every mountain out there and commanding them to be removed. What he's saying is there's nothing impossible here. Things that are impossible with men, the faith of God can do. What we cannot do, the faith of God available for the new covenant believer in Christ can get the job done. It can blow mountains out. It can remove problems in our life. And so he says, whoever. Now that takes out the fact that it's not just the disciples here. It's not just it's not just the divinity trick here. We got to leave this to the professionals and we're amateurs and we're not supposed to be doing this. No, he says whoever includes all of us right here. Whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things which he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. So he's telling us what faith will do. We can speak to mountains and command them to be removed, and they will be removed. They will obey us. But it says, if we do not doubt in our heart. See, the problem is not with the faith that we have. We don't need more faith. We don't need bigger faith. We don't need greater faith. What we need is pure faith. And that's what he's talking about here. You know, a lot of people says, well, I guess I just didn't have enough faith to get it done. No, they had enough faith. They had more than enough faith. The problem was they had an abundance of unbelief. They had an abundance of doubt that negated their faith. And that's what I want to talk to you about tomorrow, about these doubts right here, removing these doubts in our heart so the pure faith of God can move the mountains in our life, do the impossible, and bring the good life, not only to ourselves, but to all mankind around us. Well, that's a good place to stop, and that's where I'm going to pick it up tomorrow. Join us again tomorrow. If you like additional resources and materials, go to TonyCowan.org, and we will see you tomorrow.